And welcome, Jose Javier Rodriguez, to Latino Victory Substack. We are very excited to have this conversation with you today. For those who are joining for the first time, my name is Catherine Pichardo, President and CEO at Latino Victory, where our one singular mission is to build Latino political power so our voices and values are reflected in the policies that move our country forward. And we're very excited to have this conversation with you today. For those who are joining us not for the first time, we apologize. We ran a little bit behind due to technical difficulties, but we're excited to be here. And I would like to introduce Jose Javier. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you're running for Attorney General in Florida.
Well, Catherine, first of all, thank you to you, Latino Victory, and everybody who supports this work. Very much appreciate a chance to be on with you. Jose Javier Rodriguez, I'm honored to be on with you. So, the quick introduction for me is I grew up bilingual, bicultural in Miami. I served in the Peace Corps in West Africa. After earning a Harvard Law degree, I came back home to Miami. And for 20 years, I've been a trial attorney, fighting for the little guy in one way or the other, for low-income workers, low-income homeowners we're getting taken advantage of. I also served the community I grew up in the state Senate. So I served in the legislature for 8 years, the House and then the Senate. And then I had the opportunity to serve as Assistant Secretary of Labor for President Biden. And the reason why I'm running for Florida Attorney General is we need someone to serve as the people's lawyer. I'm running to be the people's lawyer. So, most states have a state attorney general, and in most cases, that job description is to be the people's lawyer, to represent the people of the state, not the government, but frankly, to stand up for people when they're getting taken advantage of, whether they're being taken advantage of as consumers, as taxpayers, whether it's about keeping us safe, whether we take advantage of by criminals and organized crime. That's the job of the attorney general. And so, what I talk about here in Florida, my home, is talk about returning the office to the people, because it used to be that we had an attorney general that would do the job. That would just be normal, focus on the job. And so that's why I talk on the campaign trail about focusing on the 3 C's: tackling crime, tackling costs, and tackling corruption. So, and really, when you ask me why I'm running, it's just consistent with my career. My whole career has been, in one way or the other, about standing up to bullies or helping other people to stand up to bullies. And so that's essentially the biggest and most important part of the attorney general's job. And that has, we've gotten so far here in Florida from that being what we get from the attorney general's office. But I could save that for a later question. We've got a lot to talk about there.
We do have a lot to talk on. The fact is that in this moment, our communities are feeling the pinch. And so you talk about tackling costs. And obviously, as we've seen in recent polling, that's the biggest concern that Americans, including Latinos, are facing today. How to bring down the cost of groceries and gas and housing and healthcare and all of the everyday things that matter. Education, how do we protect our environment? I know in Florida, home insurance and flood insurance costs are very high. And so,
Yeah.
to a certain degree, as the people's lawyers, what would be your role in that? And I would say also in this moment, serving as a checks and balances to the executive and to the legislative branches, certainly, as we say in Spanish, el contrapeso, right?
Yeah.
To make
Yeah.
sure that people's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are protected in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talk about crime, cost, corruption. You're talking about the cost and corruption piece. And when I talk about these issues, oftentimes I'll get the response from people when they hear me on the campaign trail. They'll say, "Hey, Jose Javier, I hear you talking about the light bill. I hear you talking about insurance. I hear you talking about making sure people get paid when they're on the job. I hear you talking about even the rent. Corporate landlords." And sometimes people are like, "Well, that's not the attorney general's job." Somehow they think, right? And they kind of say, "Hey, what are you talking about? That if you're running for attorney general?" And I say that the only way you could have that reaction is if you've lived in Florida for the last few decades, where in other states, and it used to be the case here, we used to be the leader, decades ago. Florida was the place where the Attorney General's office was leading the way, suing big tobacco and doing really big and important things. And other states would ask us, hey, can you send us your lawyers so we can figure out how to protect our residents and recover for them when they're getting scammed? Whereas here, it's been so long since we've had that. Not only do people, people can be forgiven for not expecting that from the Attorney General's office here in Florida, but in some cases, people can be forgiven for having this vague idea that somehow the Attorney General reports to the governor, and it couldn't be further from the case. So, what I talk about to try to explain is that the Attorney General should be there to level the playing field, particularly when people are getting screwed. People and businesses are getting screwed. So, our utility rates, our electric utility rates, only go up if it's approved in Tallahassee. Our insurance rates only go up unless it's approved in Tallahassee. And we used to have the kind of Attorney General's office that would push back and fight. And that's not even a partisan statement. It wasn't that long ago that we had normal attorneys general here in Florida. But so I tell people, one part of my background is doing exactly this. So when I was in the legislature, when I was running for reelection in 2020, Republican operatives. So this was a state Senate seat in Miami-Dade County. I was running for reelection, and Republican operatives ran a fake candidate. This was a corrupt scheme, and it turned out it was a criminal scheme. It was a prosecution. And the Miami State Attorney's Office, or like equivalent of our district attorney, did a fantastic job prosecuting the case. What they did was they put somebody on the ballot with the same name. They bribed him, Alex Rodriguez. I'm Jose Javier Rodriguez, obviously. And out of 250,000 votes, this fake candidate got a little over 6,000, and I lost by less than 40. And the important part about the story isn't that, the scheme itself, but why they did it. It was the biggest electric utility here in Florida greenlit the operation personally and funded the operation because there was nobody standing up for the forced customers of our electric utilities more than I was in Tallahassee. And when I say forced customers, of course, I mean every business, every household that's forced to sign on to to this monopoly utilities here in Florida. That's how it works. And they just go up to Tallahassee, take our ratepayer money, and lobby against us. And almost nobody stands up to them. Well, I did a lot. And so the special interests in Tallahassee know what's coming because they know that I have a history of standing up for everyday people, whether, again, they're taxpayers, insurance policyholders, of forced ratepayers for electricity. And so I'm going around the state and talking about how the fact that we need somebody in Tallahassee looking out for us. Think about it. It's like you're hiring your lawyer and you're getting screwed. You're going to hire somebody who works for the company that's screwing you, which is essentially my opponent, or you're going to hire somebody who has a whole history of taking these folks on in court and in the legislature.
And so thank you for sharing that, because I think it often the interconnection between some of the decisions that are made in the halls of power and the people who put them there are not as clear for the average voter as perhaps they should be, right? There's not a lot of transparency in a lot of these transactions. And so I'm excited, having seen you on the campaign trail, that you're really delineating a lot of or shedding light in a lot of those transactions so that folks understand what's really at stake. And so for you coming into running for attorney general with your education and your experience both as a prosecutor and as a legislator and as an advocate, right? That's really what we're getting with you, is what you're telling me. I think the other piece that matters, and especially much has been said about the Latino electorate and the Latino vote. And we know that in Florida, the Latino vote is significant. And so, um, how do you also bring your culture and that lived experience um, to let voters know, many of whom are disaffected, that you understand them and they feel represented with you?
Absolutely. So first of all, one of the things that I meant to say on the issues we were just talking about, all the electric bill, the rent, all that, all of these issues hit all Floridians or almost all Floridians. I mean, unless you're a giant corporation that has 100 lobbyists on staff, you probably don't need to worry about it, right? But these are issues that hit all of us, right? Small businesses, families, everybody. But I probably, I don't need, if you're Latino and in Florida, you probably don't need to be told that these issues hit us oftentimes a lot harder. And one of the things that I found is, we talk about things a little differently, not just because sometimes it's in Spanish, but, the link between corruption in Tallahassee and money coming out of your pocket. It's a little easier to make that link explaining it to Latinos because we understand what corruption can mean, and so I think that again over the years, just as doing constituent service and running for election and just serving in office, that's something that comes through a lot. But, one of the other things too, and again, Florida Latinos don't need to be told that we're diverse, right? So not just diverse in terms of, where you or your parents came from, but also in terms of, like, the ideology, religion, race. So we're very diverse. And so I think one of the things that's important is like I'm talking about issues that impact all of us, right? And I also talk about public safety and one of the impacts of having a government in Tallahassee that's distracted by all this political stuff. I mean, they just seem very interested in Tallahassee in showing off to DC. Oh, look how tough we are. Look how, look how crazy we are and all this kind of stuff. And they're just very distracted. And so one of the impacts of that is they take their eye off the ball on public safety, right? I was just with a colleague of mine in an area where there's a lot of gun violence and some basic things we ought to be doing in terms of providing funds to local law enforcement for witness protection that we stopped doing a couple of years ago, right? And so, so when I'm talking about voters, I'm talking to people about the things that unite us, but especially Latinos, right? When we're talking about public safety, and making sure there's a level playing field to get ahead. Those are things that all of us can get around, right? And it doesn't, so I think that's part of I think the beauty of the message, but I think you also see it in some of when I go around the state, the response among Latinos often is a lot stronger, just in terms of like, yes, this is what we need in Tallahassee.
And certainly Tallahassee is a focus of what your checks and balances work would look like and fighting corruption. Are there any specific issues where you think um, the corruption is most significant? What are you going to do on day one?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so for you're asking the question about the contrapeso, and absolutely, that's what the attorney general should be, contrapeso. And instead, what we have the most corrupt attorney general we've ever had here in Florida. And for some people who follow Florida politics, that says a lot, right? But the rather than root out corruption, my opponent, who's the current officer holder, he was appointed by Ron DeSantis to fill out the term left by Ashley Moody when she replaced our Senator Marco Rubio. And so, in some ways, he was put there to cover up for an administration. He was appointed through the DeSantis administration. So a lot of what he's been doing, uh, it's almost like he wants us to know he's corrupt. If you want to read up on it, his name is James Uthmeyer. There's a string of news articles about how he takes $25,000, and then soon after that, you get some official action from the Attorney General's office that normally the Attorney General doesn't like get involved in, like local land use things, and so it's just wildly corrupt. And so, when we say contrapeso, there's just so many things on day one, right? But I'm going to focus on those things that are most important to us, right? Public safety, and when we look at the corruption has hit hardest in two areas. One is they've stolen tens of millions of dollars out of the Medicaid program, right? There's also massive open corruption when it comes to school funding and how certain private contractors are getting away with a lot, and it's in broad daylight, and yet nothing seems to happen to recover that money that belongs to our schools, our students, and obviously the parents that rely on that education is for their kids. And another whole area. uh, simply making sure that the attorney general and that state government knows what it can and cannot do. My opponent and sometimes the governor go around threatening other local leaders, going around threatening private citizens with powers they do not have. And so, in some ways, it's prompted me to start saying that I'm kind of the conservative in the race because my opponent is a radical, right? Like I will be constrained by the Constitution here in Florida, and because my opponent is not, and because we are in a time where we need somebody who's frankly focused on the rule of law. There are a lot of people who've been crossing the aisle. I happen to be a Democrat, but I don't particularly see this as a very partisan election given the stakes. And so there have been plenty of Republicans crossing, and I think anyway, but so the stakes are higher when it comes to rule of law, and I think particularly growing up and living in Miami, I don't think I need to convince anybody of the importance of making sure that we're ruled by law, and that the importance of having a contrapeso to really put the checks and balances in Tallahassee.
And you mentioned the role of partisanship in this race. And certainly, um, as a Democrat myself, I have to admit, Florida has often disappointed us. and
Yeah,
especially as it relates to national politics. But again, we're facing a moment in our country today that if we're alive, nobody can sit this out. And what we see
amen.
in the polling and on the streets is that a lot of folks understand that our country is not going in the right direction. Certainly, Florida is not going in the right direction in many ways, as you've just delineated, and I'm excited that you're running statewide to help get us back on track. But our country is also not going in the right direction, and so you see both Democrats and Republicans. Needing and wanting change. It's what we expect to see as uh, voters go to the polls in November to potentially decide who gains control of the House of Representatives for this next cycle, as well as the U.S. Senate. And it's certainly a weight on the President of the United States. So I'm going to ask you. Uh, would you sue Donald Trump if you were Attorney General?
Well, listen, I wouldn't commit to any particular lawsuits, but I want to say one of the things that's important to have an attorney general that's focused on the people of the state is that where necessary, absolutely, as the next attorney general, I would sue federal agencies, federal government when necessary. And that's one of the things that's been very politicized of late. So I don't want to say, oh, that's not goal number one. Goal number one is advocating for the people of Florida. So when it's necessary to stand up for the state of Florida, if there's, and if you look around the country, attorneys general in many states, coalitions of them have been the ones restoring SNAP benefits or the tariff relief that consumers and importers got. That was state attorneys general that fought for that. So there's a role absolutely for the attorney general to stand up from the abuses of the federal government, including the use of the National Guard, these immigration surges. So in January, with people's support. So there's only two choices in November: myself and Ruth Meyer. There's here in Florida, there's primary elections in August. Everybody should get out and vote. Do your research before you vote. Voting by mail is great because you get to do your research. It's like a take home exam. But I will not be on the ballot until November. But hopefully with the voter support, I'd be sworn in January, and absolutely. And one of the things I want to mention, along with what you're saying, so my background and my culture is very important when I'm running. And I've always talked about my father's example. So he came when he was a teenager through Operation Pedro Pan from Cuba. And, his story, he worked very hard and took advantage of all the opportunities that this country provides, right? And, you'll hear that a lot from the Cuban community in Miami, especially, right? That, that like how important that is. And for a lot of us, trying to make sure that those opportunities continue to be available is a lot of reason why I ran to begin with, right? When I saw that sort of eroding. But we had a chance to speak on a panel here in Florida. I want to say almost probably about a little over a week ago, and we were talking about some of the reasons why Florida has been so contested. Right? We talked about the Cuban vote, the very small but emerging Venezuelan vote. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Puerto Rican vote a lot, but there's a lot of reasons and stories why at a lot of different points in time, different different groups of Latinos in different parts of the state saw the Republican Party as relevant, right? Relevant to what they were going through. And what I'm seeing is that a big opportunity and shift because when I'm out there talking to people, again, I'm focusing on the three C's. That's not a very partisan message. And what you see on the other hand is my opponent. My opponent was the one behind this, shameful and embarrassing alligator Alcatraz, right? That's
Mhm.
him. Republicans are the one who shut that down because it was so abusive and so expensive and so ridiculous. They shut it down. So that's what my opponent's doing. Meanwhile, I'm talking about having a better future for all of us.
I appreciate that. And specifically, the fact is that what I'd like everyone to who's listening to get from this conversation is that we need to get back to basics. And that's exactly what you're doing in terms of using the role of attorney general to focus on crime, corruption, and getting back to the basics of what an attorney general is supposed to be, which is the people's lawyer. And so, as it relates to bringing costs down, I think it's voters' number one priority as they're going to be making their analysis of who is the best candidates to represent them, and I'm excited to hear that you're getting a good response. Folks seem to love you in every corner of Florida where I go. What is you think the most important message you want to leave folks with as we're coming into time?
Yeah, as we're coming into time, other than putting my website out there, jjr.vote, and other than putting my social media handles, which are Jose Javier JJR. The my message is that we can change things here in Florida, right? So please get engaged. Please check out what's going on. Obviously, I'd love for your vote in November, but there's plenty more. As Catherine was saying, there's plenty more to do than just vote. We need you to vote. But we need to make sure that you're helping everybody in your family, your workplace, register to vote here in Florida, sign up to vote by mail. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. And as I said, it's like a take home exam. You don't have to just, when you're in the voting booth, sometimes you feel like, oh man, I got to get it done quickly. If you vote by mail, it's a take home exam. So that would be my parting thought. That we have a real opportunity here to bring change to Florida, and I appreciate everybody who's helping. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you heard it, folks. Please read up a little bit more about what Jose Javier Rodriguez is doing to make Florida a better place to live, work, and raise families. He's running for Attorney General in the November election. You won't see him on the ballot in August for the primaries. And you can learn more on his website and through social media at Jose Javier JJR. Thank you so much. And let's keep fighting. Let's keep winning. We're going to get there in November.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.